So yesterday we started to talk about changes that you made within your district. We started to dive into some of the changes and the TxCSI that we'll see upcoming. And our main focus here is to make sure that we give you all a runway into the process of creating systems for fundamental change. We want you to go back and not continue to do the same work with new standards. All right, so we really want to focus in on what change looks like. So I'm going to ask you to put your leader hats back on today, and we're going to think about how to create systems that drive fundamental change. And I think the second part of this statement, fundamental change, is the really important thing to focus on. And what it actually takes to get to that point is what we'll begin to talk through and work on today. To make these changes in all of your classrooms is going to take leaders who have a deep understanding of what the changes are. So this is the roadmap that we're starting to go along with our launch to TxCSI this week. We also want to make sure you have the tools and resources to support your staff at campuses, teachers, and even students throughout this process. So again, we'll begin to dive into that some today. If we do this well, you're going to see real, continuous growth and change within your districts, which is going to impact the students that we serve. And like we said yesterday, that's the main reason why we're all here in this room. So I'm going to put a quote up, and I want you to take a moment to read through this quote. All right, take a moment and turn and talk with your shoulder partner. When you read this quote, what sticks out and stands out to you? Next question is, how do we get here? How do we get to fundamental change? One thing that we need to understand that true fundamental change is ongoing. The finish line is going to be nebulous, right? We're really trying in this space to move away from the idea of perfection, which we now know can be a barrier to equitable practices, right? And more towards the concept of continuous growth. There's nothing wrong with baby steps. We just have to continue to take them and not be comfortable after, we found success. Also, and I know this was mentioned yesterday, the idea of mindset. Mindset is a huge part of this at each level. So we have to make the shift away from more deficit-based thinking to more asset-based mindsets. All right? What does that look like? What does that mean? It can be very nuanced, right? It can be the small things like, a lot of us are experiencing issues with staffing right now, right? So it's that subtle shift from looking at it as like, wow, we're really struggling to keep teachers. What do? To looking at the really great practices you're doing to enhance the skills of the staff and teachers you have and retain the staff and teachers you have, right? It's a simple switch like that that really changes the thinking and moves more towards the positive asset base, especially at the district level. If we look at it at the campus level, it can be the difference between your teachers and campus leaders like, another initiative, here we go, right? To, whoa, no, this may really be good and help and impact our students. Let's dig into it and find, our sweet spot so that we can make sure we're impacting students on a daily basis. Data and evidence. We have to really dive in and use cycles of inquiry as it relates to data and evidence. But we also have to make sure that everyone is on the same page as it relates to data and evidence. We talked a bit about that yesterday. Things as simple as using the same terminology, making sure that we're looking at the same data points and examining them in the same way is going to be important, especially as it relates to consistency in the implementation process. But data has to be at the root of what we're doing to achieve fundamental change. Thinking about systems and acting strategically to influence systems and all of their parts, because we know there are a lot of moving parts in these systems, right? So we have to think about all of those parts and how they interact with each other. They're all cogs in this machine. And if they're not working together and working together consistently, this is where we could begin to find problems. So really beginning to dive into the different levels that help each system run is going to be really important to achieving this fundamental change. I think, as Jennifer and I were standing in the front getting ready to do our handoff, I was talking to her about the idea of this process, that last bullet. It really has to be something that's holistic, and in many ways, it needs to be organic. So really building within and doing what you're doing today, and in this process of having people from all levels of your district sitting down at the table to have this conversation is how we begin to get to this point. So with that, I'll hand it over to Jennifer, who's going to talk about systems and system thinking.
Thank you. Yeah, so we have you from all parts of your district, but each of you probably has many, many roles throughout these different systems. So we're going to be using this word a lot today. We're just going to be a little bit more concrete about what we mean when we say systems and systems thinking. These little blue boxes on the screen are not new to any of you. You are here because you wrote these fantastic applications that show that you really understand how to make change in your district, right? You are the experts. And that's why we have all of you together to learn from one another. But each of you may be experts in different parts of the education system. And all of these different parts, of course, have to work together. It would be very difficult to do effective professional learning if you didn't have some effect, some benefit from time, policies, administrative support, right? Maybe some funding. We got this building for free, but that big thing doesn't always happen. If you're trying to do something with assessment, probably curriculum and instruction are going to change. They're going to be affected. These all affect one another. And each one of these blue boxes, I'm a science person, but I know there are some people who also do math. This is like a fractal, because you could keep digging down with a microscope. Teacher preparation is not just a monolith. There are so many systems within that, and they all have to work together. And if you affect one part, it's going to affect the whole thing, and that's going to affect professional learning for the in-service. It's going to affect curriculum. Everything is interconnected, right? So this is kind of the basis for our thinking about systems thinking. And so as you think about what parts of the system you work in, just take a minute and think about which parts do you currently influence, what parts could you influence, and then how can thinking about how these different parts are interconnected help you see your work a little bit differently.
So this slide is adapted from a graphic that was created by Wested. I believe our own Jenny Sarna was a part of the original, if I'm not mistaken. It shows the roadmap that we need to take to get to equitable education practices for all students. This was adapted from interviews and surveys that were conducted nationally from professionals about what they saw as the most necessary components to create these environments. So you see here we have high quality professional learning, sustained partnerships and support for science, high quality instructional materials, shared leadership, and high quality and aligned assessment. So when we looked at the original that was created by WestEd, we found that what we were doing in TxCSI, or wanting to do in TxCSI, was very similar, right? So we adapted it a bit and changed some of the terminology in the titles to fit what we're doing here, but it really encapsulates what we're seeing both locally and at a national level as it relates to creating the equitable learning opportunities for students, especially as it relates to science, which we're diving into this week. These elements are important. They each have their own individual space, but they all have to work in conjunction for us to really get to the space where we're seeing these equitable opportunities. Did you want to add anything else to that,
Oops. Yeah, so we're going to go back to this for just a second. I saw some people writing down, taking pictures. This is a lot of words, right? So what we're trying to do is come together and have these buckets that we can talk about concretely and fairly easily. It's always good if you can get them down to 3, but we couldn't quite do that. So we have them down to these 5. And you can see that all of these things on this big old map slide and all of the other system components that I know that you have in your districts, because there are a billion of them, they hopefully fit under these 5 buckets, right? So we're going to dig deeper into these 5 buckets, think about them, think about how our work relates to them. And to do this, we're going to pass out some cards. Sorry, so. We're going to have, each of you have a little packet of cards in a nice little Ziploc bag that you can take home for craft projects. And each one of the cards is going to be about one of these 5 system drivers. Right, so we call them system drivers because they are going to drive the change that we're all going to talk about. You have all 5 cards. You're going to check them out, start reading through, and then pick 3 of the cards that really resonate with you based on how your work fits into the system. Right, so we're talking about our roles, how we influence the system. We're going to think about that in light of these 5 cards. So pick 3. And then we will talk as a group about the cards that we picked. So give you about 3 minutes to kind of skim through the cards and pick out your 3. Once you're ready, once you have your 3 cards that most resonate with you, talk at your group about your 3 cards and see if there are patterns. Right, it could be that different roles in the district would resonate with different cards. It could be because of your district context. You all have a card or 2 in common. But think about what role do these system drivers play in your district? I am guessing from all the conversations that we had yesterday that there isn't any district that doesn't deal with one of them at all. I mean, that would be, I want to talk to you if that's the case, because that's interesting. but they might play slightly different roles. They might show up differently in your district. So talk about that. How do these show up in your district? And then you'll see on the cards they have some questions. All right, so work through those questions as a district, and you can take notes, however, whatever makes sense to you, whether it's writing in your journals. We can pull up Google Docs and put them on Resource Connect so you can come back to them later, but whatever works for you, just let us know. So have at it. We'll have about 15 minutes for these discussions.
So thank you all for diving in to that exercise and beginning to really examine the systems that we know lead to equitable educational practices within your district. So now, we're gonna make this a little tangible, a little concrete for you. So somewhere in close proximity to your tables right now, you'll find your change process maps that you created yesterday, and a blank sheet of chart paper. So grab those if you will. And what we want you to do here is, we want you to think about the conversation you just had around these systems. And we want you to look at your charts and determine which system components were important drivers in the work that you were doing in the change process that you talked about on your map yesterday. We understand that all of them might not be present depending on what your initiative was. We want you to focus on the ones that were. Once you had an opportunity to do the comparison and kind of talk through which were present, we want you to take that blank sheet of chart paper and create a plus delta chart. And we want you to arrange your system cards under each header on the chart paper in priority order. And give some context for why you placed each one in the column that you placed in, right? So you can literally physically take the systems drivers cards to the chart paper and just write an explanation next to it as to why you placed it in that category. So think about where were these elements present in the change that you talked about yesterday. You also can think about which components were not involved and how would including these components in your system help change what we're going into right now as we think about the future and how we're going to implement some of these changes as it relates to science, right? So first step, take a look at your change process maps. Think about where the systems drivers cards are present. Once you've done that, I want you to rank them in priority order in areas where you did really well, and areas that you need to grow, and giving context for each. We're going to give you about 15 minutes to work on this, and then we'll come back together and discuss it. You may begin.